We have all done so much online shopping from Amazon and other places that if UPS showed up on our front porch with a llama, we probably would say to ourselves, yeah, I probably ordered that. For a few moments today, I'd like to talk about one of the great Advent saints, St. John of the Cross, whose feast day was December 14th, known as Juan de la Cruz. And he was certainly the greatest Carmelite priest. He was a mystical theologian. He and Teresa of Avila are the two great mystical and ascetical doctors of the Church. He's known for his writings, The Dark Night of the Soul, The Ascent of Mount Carmel, Spiritual Canticle. He was born in Spain in 1542. His father had been a successful silk merchant, but he was disowned when he married a young woman named Catalina, who was a poor weaver's daughter. Because of that, he was disowned by his family, fell into poverty. His dad then died when John was young. So combining orphanages and institutions, and John was able to also work at a hospital for the poor and took care of the poor, the sick, and the dying, and put himself through school, went to the Jesuit college in Salamanca, studied theology and philosophy, was then ordained a Carmelite priest at age 25, and not long after that met the great St. Teresa of Avila, who was 52 at the time, and he was half her age, but she convinced him to help with the Carmelite reform, and together they became what we call the dynamic duo, right? We think of Batman and Robin, or even in this church we think of St. Francis and St. Clare, or Benedict and Scholastica. Here we had Teresa of Avila and John of the Cross. She would reform the female branch of the Carmelites. He would reform the male branch of the Carmelites. And they truly were the saints of the Catholic Reformation. He embraced the primitive rule of the Carmelites, which are called the Discalced Carmelites, because it meant they wore no shoes, and lived a life of extreme poverty. Teresa of Avila became the abbess of the Incarnation Monastery in Avila, and John became the confessor to the nuns. It was one of those communities where sometimes it was called that the nuns were as pure as angels, but as proud as demons. They didn't want to be reformed. Actually, nobody likes to be reformed. Think of what happened to the prophets. They were all persecuted or killed. Think what happened to John the Baptist, who called people to reform. So people just don't like to be changed. They say the only one who likes to be changed is a baby in a diaper, right? That's the only one who really likes to be changed. Everybody else resists conversion and change and reformation. So John was seized by the unreformed branch of the Carmelites, and he was asked to renounce the reform. He refused, so he was thrown into prison in Toledo in a cell that was 10 feet by 6 feet, only with a little tiny window and an oil lamp. A kind monk gave him some paper so he could write, and this is where he wrote some of his greatest poetry. When he was being persecuted and punished, they would bring him out every week and publicly lash him and then put him back in the cell. John did not become bitter. He used this time for prayer and penance and the most beautiful poetry ever written in the Spanish language. After 9 months of imprisonment, he was able to escape and continued his reform of the different male branches of the order. He then died at the young age of 49 of an infection, and then was canonized in 1726, and 200 years later, in 1926, was declared a doctor of the Church. And again, he used his suffering well. He used his suffering for the good. He's really called the doctor of detachment. So I'd encourage you to read his writings of mystical and ascetical theology. They are very deep, but Dark Night of the Soul, Ascent of Mount Carmel, Spiritual Canticle. And my two favorite quotes from St. John of the Cross are, "Where there is no love, put love, and you will find love. And then, in the evening of life, you will be judged on how much you have loved, how much you love God, how much you loved others." So really, to summarize his life, I've thought in looking at his life that we could do it just with the letter P. He was born into poverty, lived a life of prayer and penance, took care of the poor, then became a priest, embracing the primitive rule, but suffered persecution and punishment. He was thrown in prison, but he remained positive, and he wrote poetry and prose, and he's the patron saint of poets, mystical theologians, and contemplatives. So I'll give you a blessing now with the relic of the great St. John of the Cross, asking him during this Advent season to help us to offer up our sufferings, to unite them to the Lord, to remain positive, not to be negative with regards to challenges or difficulties or sufferings, but to instead have this be the springboard into a deeper life of prayer during this holy season to prepare our hearts for Christ in a few days. Through the intercession of St. John of the Cross, may Almighty God bless you, the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.